Today, let's go on a journey, shall we? I'm gonna take you to the dark, pixelated platformer that is In the Dark. I had the chance to talk to Jasper Tucker, the developer behind this very exciting title. We dived into a whole bunch of different things, and I can't wait for you to hear everything that we had to discuss. So, without further ado, it's time to get into the interview, shall we?
All right, so just kind of going straight into it. Before we get to the actual game itself, let's kind of talk about just the inspiration to create a title. What kind of got you down that road? What games impacted that decision? Just kind of briefly go through that for me.
Yeah, so basically, In the Dark started off as kind of a way for me to try and get into the industry. So I learned that game design was something that I wanted to do coming after college. And so I was going on Coursera, going on edX, and pretty much figuring out how to do C Sharp, how to use Unity, how to make pixel art so I could throw something together. And essentially, so I could talk to employers, talk to anyone, and actually show them something like here's what I've been able to create, here's what I've been able to make. And one thing after another, as you're creating enemies and creating your own world, things just kind of snowball into like, oh, I guess I'm making like a full game now. And in terms of inspirations, Hollow Knight is definitely huge. Celeste and Undertale, in the terms of how they describe the story, are also fantastic.
Okay. So moving into the actual game itself, talk about the actual story behind it, what drove that forward, the different characters and enemies within it. Just kind of break that all down for me.
Yeah. So the story and narrative has always that's definitely been a big struggle of mine because you go and you're making all these characters and all these enemies and these worlds and stuff, and you can kind of look at everything and you have a general idea of how to make certain designs and how they should look for what like attack patterns they have or how to make everything kind of mesh together.
Mhm.
But every now and then I had to step back and be like, do I really know what I'm doing here? Or like, do I really make sure I have this cohesive whole to bring everything together? And I'm taking a lot of inspiration from what Hollow Knight does with environmental storytelling and how I'm not being very upfront with here's who you are, here's what you need to do, here's who you are, here's what everything is going on. But kind of the world around you and what you see and the enemies, they kind of tell their own story in terms of how they look and how they sound. And it's going to unravel more the more you explore and more of the world that you see. And then I'm taking some inspiration from Celeste, which is a great example of just taking a very, very simple idea of, in that game, it's girl climbs a mountain as a metaphor for mental health.
Hmm.
And then from there, they can divide that into chapters and get much, much more nuanced. But it's an idea of just taking a very simple idea and then breaking that down, and to not give too much away. Instead of climbing a mountain and in the dark, you're going down into the dark, farther and farther down, and what that metaphor will mean for how you think about yourself or how you interact with people.
Okay.
So,
One of the things while you were giving your explanation that came to mind for me is a lot of even indie developers, while they do have a lot of much smaller teams than AAA titles per se, a
mhm.
lot of them have either story writers or different people that just kind of separate to do different aspects of the game. So for you, you're a solo dev, obviously. What was the hardest parts to tackle within this title for you?
Definitely, I would say narrative has been a big struggle, but I'm getting there. I'd say a big struggle is actually probably the very technical side because I
Hmm.
am not a computer scientist. Um, and so getting, much of the simple logic is easy. And
Yeah.
then you can figure out character movement. You can figure out how to get enemies to walk and follow you and attack. You can figure out how to make scenes connect to each other and craft world maps and do all that. But every now and then you start looking at that frame rate and you're like, oh man, and figuring out optimizations and little tricks like that has definitely been a big time consumer.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
branching further away from that.
Oh,
The game itself, from beginning when you first started it to where you're at right now, how long have you been working on this title?
Not too long. Probably I began in, I want to say last April, maybe late April, early May. So
Okay,
it's about 8, 9 months, I think.
that's impressive. You got it very far very quickly.
Yeah.
So past that, going in back into the questions, let's just keep in mind the different level structures. How can players expect the story to go? How long is it going to take them to go through the entire game? And outside of that, when you first started the title, I know you'd mentioned you hadn't even planned it to be a full game, but from when you first kind of envisioned the title itself, how much did you either dial up or scale back, or what was that like?
Yeah. So with the demo out, people have, I can see that people spend around like 10 to 20 minutes in that first little area. And so my goal is to clock in at least around 5 hours on average. Of course, it's hard to tell for me because, when you're playing the game thousands and thousands of times to just test things, you get good at the game. So the
Speed
time
runs, yeah.
yeah, the time it takes me to do certain things aren't the time it might take someone who's just playing the game to do certain things. But my goal is to clock in somewhere around 5 hours.
Okay.
Um,
And you've had your demo out. What have, if any, have you had to really take into account with the players that have been playing your demo?
yeah, well, thankfully, Twitter has an awesome indie game community as well. So a lot of
Hmm.
feedback we get are from the players as well as people who are also making games, which I guess can be a double-edged sword because they can understand one side to get a game to make a game, so they might be a little softer on you. But at the same time, they know like mechanically what to really think about.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's important to know. I've gotten mostly positive feedback, which is awesome. Um, but what I think what is important to know is some people will suggest changes or like, oh, you should maybe invincibility should last a little bit longer, or these should take, these shouldn't break in one hit, or things that I 100% consider, and I look and I'm like, oh wow, you're totally right. Or I double back and I'm like, maybe not.
Hmm.
Um, I guess for example, I had this one mechanic where there's these kind of health pedestals where you can buy health from them, and I've placed you can break the objects in the foreground. And so at some points, I put the objects around the health pedestals, so you might swing at the object and you accidentally break the health pedestal, and then that sends health flying off, and you can just now the health pedestal doesn't work because you broke it,
Hmm.
but now you can just take the health because it flew off the top. And so some people are like, well, why would you do that? Why would you ever buy the health if you can just break it? And then other people have been like, oh, well, I didn't mean to break it. I don't ever want to break it. You
Hmm.
shouldn't you shouldn't be allowed to break it. And so it's interesting how you get these two sides of people, like two extremes of people who don't like the feature for one reason, or do like the feature, or don't like it for the completely opposite reason. And so it's great to get feedback just to see like where are their heads at pretty much. And
No.
then how do I then think about the game design from
Hmm.
there? Super, super helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then diving into gameplay mechanics, can you kind of talk to me about the skills tree in the game, different ways your character ranks up, um, just different things that will affect you as you play? You'd mentioned obviously the health aspect. Is there something else in there that we should know about?
Yeah. So being a Metroidvania, I'm going to start the player starts with very, very little. Um, for the first, like, you're really going to start off, it's going to feel like a platformer where it's just run and jump. And then you'll very quickly come across a sword, which is, of course, one of the main mechanics I'll be using both for enemies and movement. And then the abilities I'll be focusing on the most are ones that are both going to help you in terms of getting around the world and also helping you in combat. So stuff like variations of a dash or a double jump that will open up the world to you more naturally and at the same time help you in fighting enemies. So I guess, for example, the first one, or maybe not, if you go not in the order that I would go. But one of the first ones you can get is a dash that you also teleport through. So you can either dash left or dash right, and you teleport for the duration of that dash, which can help you, move across larger gaps, which opens up more of the map, maybe move through thin walls, but it also helps you avoid certain enemies or go through certain enemies or kind of trip things up or avoid spikes. So most of the abilities will be focusing on increasing your toolkit to kind of make you better off in the world you're in. And then there's also that other side of upgrades, which is your classic like health, damage, stuff like that.
All right, so favorite part of the game. I like to ask this question to every developer just because all of them, you guys spend so much time on these games, thousands and thousands of hours.
Mhm.
And I know it's hard to pick one specific thing, but something always seems to pop out for a developer. So for you, what kind of shines above the rest?
Oh, I would say probably, yeah, definitely there's areas I like more than others and characters I like more than others. But I would say probably the shadow mechanic that I've developed for the player, where every time you die, you'll go and respawn at the last place you saved, and along with you will spawn a little shadow of yourself. And the idea is it will move the same way you do. So you move left, it moves left, you jump, it jumps, you swing your sword, it swings its sword. And a lot of people, of course, are confused when they first see that because they're like, why is there two of me running around? And then people will quickly realize that, oh, I can attack enemies with this little shadow. And so every time you die, you get this almost second player character that will kind of help you around and like can make those difficult parts a little easier. And I love that so much because I hate playing games and then dying and then you're like, oh god, I just lost like all of my money, I lost all this progress. I'll just try again tomorrow. And then I'm hoping that this shadow mechanic can act as a reverse of that, where it's like, oh man, I lost. Oh, but now I have this little shadow that can hopefully help me beat what I just wasn't able to.
Okay. It really helps to even the odds. I like that. That's a very interesting concept to bring into a game. Past that, let's move into the actual release date. So Steam page for the game said mid 2021. Do you have a more specific window in mind at this point? I know it really fluctuates and depends a lot on just how development goes, but can you envision a specific date or month or maybe even, I don't know, a 2-month period that you think it could come out in?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to pin a month just because you go from being quarantined in the summer and just pouring hours in to being in school and being able to do nothing to winter break and pouring hours in it and then going to school again and doing nothing. um, and then summer will come up and I don't know what I'm doing this summer yet. Hopefully lots of game dev stuff.
hmm
But I want to say that the game will probably release sometime in the summer. I want
Okay.
to stay loyal to that mid 2021. If I do end up delaying it, then it will 100% release this year. I know that. I will not go into 2022. But my goal is at least probably for the end of the summer.
Okay. If you chose to delay it, you would definitely be sticking with the trend in gaming right now.
Yeah.
So nobody would be judging you on that front.
Yeah, definitely better to delay the game than to release a rush.
So true. Following its release, let's talk about DLC, seasonal content, sequels, extra games, whatever it may be. Do you have kind of a next step in mind past this game?
Well, I'll initially release it I'll go out on PC and Mac, and then after that, I want to see what it's like. This is still very much up in the air, but I do want to see what consoles look like. I know Nintendo Switch is an indie game machine, and I think getting on the Switch would be awesome. So past, I guess, the PC and Mac release, I might look into consoles. And then I haven't thought about a sequel or DLC yet, although, depending on reception, if people like it, I'm totally open to it. There's definitely a lot more in that world I'd be willing to explore. So no plans as of late. But yeah, what happens, happens.
Mhm. The indie game market is so fascinating because there's so many games that hit just developing and being released every single day. And
Yeah.
you never know which one's going to just be an absolute hit, from Little Nightmares to just so many just other random titles like it. So, I mean, it's very fascinating to see that trend.
Yeah, crazy.
And there's actually another game that came to mind when I was looking through your title. Have you ever heard of a title called Unbound Worlds Apart?
Oh,
it's also a platformer. It's I wouldn't say it's similar to what you're doing, but it is a platformer that shares some parallels with you, and it's a cool game. I think if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out because it would be worth your time.
I definitely recognize the name. I'm not sure I can picture it exactly right now. I definitely haven't played it, but I definitely recognize the name.
Video games. So just kind of circling all the way back, when you decided to develop this, or when you decided to go down the road of development, past Metroidvanias and platformers, what other games influenced that decision? Because there's so many out there that it could definitely have triggered that. Or was there a specific developer even that triggered that?
Well, I grew up as a Nintendo kid.
Hmm.
I've had like the DS Lite, DSi, 3DS, Wii U, Switch, the whole lot. Um, and so Legend of Zelda and Mario, of course, the two biggies are huge. And I guess Zelda Breath of the Wild kind of what Zelda's great at, I think, is storytelling and evoking certain emotions. And Breath of the Wild, bringing that open space and experiencing Breath of the Wild, I think really cemented that idea that video games can do something that film and television really can't, and how players react with a world in their head, which is so fascinating to me. And I've been very into music for a while. I've been playing cello for maybe like over 13 years, piano for about 2, and I'm doing music theory and composition right now. And so I've looked up and studied a lot from composers like those who work with Nintendo, or Christopher Larkin, who did the work for Hollow Knight, or Lena Raine, who did the stuff for Celeste. And I think my introduction to wanting to do stuff in the game industry was a love for certain Nintendo games like Legend of Zelda, and then indie games like Hollow Knight, and then a love for that music as well. You know, trying to learn it on the piano, or trying to learn like what chord progressions are they doing, or why does this motif or theme work the way it does. And I'd say that was really probably my introduction to really wanting to get into it.
Okay. And for In the Dark, you all the music for the game, that's your music? You did that yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, nice. A lot of indie developers, I know they usually outsource that. They usually have bring people in who do it for them. So you jack of all trades, you do everything. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is the very fortunate thing of going into it. If I went into it with any experience, it was definitely a musical experience.
Final question before we wrap things up: Easter eggs in the game. Every developer kind of has something that they fall back on that they love to kind of insert into their titles. Do you have any that are in there somewhere that you want to mention, or is that something you want to leave secret?
I've thought about it. I guess because I've been thinking, I'm like, what do I have to allude to? Since In the Dark is the beginning, I've definitely been toying with the idea, certainly, because it's so easy to create a map and have this whole area, and then just put in that little secret spot that's not shown, where you can hide stuff. And I definitely, I will be doing that. I'm not going to say what it is, but I will be doing that. Yeah.
That is all the questions I have. Is there any other gameplay mechanics, story elements, anything in general that you want to touch on before we kind of wrap things up?
I think that's good. Things are constantly evolving and changing, but I think that's good.
Okay, perfect.
I had a blast diving into In the Dark. It's a very intriguing title, dark, a lot of different things that we're really going to explore within this game. We don't have a release date yet, but I can't wait for the day we finally get it. I can't wait for the day we finally get to explore this game in all of its fruition. It was a blast talking to Jasper. I'm very excited for all the development he's doing. And I can't wait for you guys to come back and subscribe, because there are a ton of interviews on the way, a ton of content on the way, and I want you to be there. I want you to be a part of it, because without you, none of this is possible. I am Nick Lehner. This is The Side Quest. Like, comment, and subscribe. But until next time, stay gaming, stay curious, and I will see y'all next time. Take it easy.
You gotta finish your sentence. Over.
That's it. My sentence is over.
Your sentence is what, Brian?